What's a trail bike? That's not an easy question to answer, especially not over the past couple of years. A little less travel is just about the only constant you'll find if you look at a cross-section of trail bikes from different manufacturers, and even that is still sometimes up for debate, it seems. Beefed up cross-country or scaled-down enduro, it's not always easy to tell the difference, but it's crucial that you understand the implications, especially if you're out to buy just the one bike. Nukeproof's new Reactor is jumping straight into this red-hot market segment, and it's got some pretty solid arguments going for it, especially this hooligan RS version. After 5 months on the trail, we're here to take an in-depth look at this rowdy little rascal, so don't go anywhere. The Reactor is a bit of a fresh start for Nukeproof in many aspects. It may carry the name of a 25-year-old model, but this is strictly a 2020 bike. For starters, it's made entirely out of carbon, which is a first for Nukeproof. Their Carbon Mega has alloy rear triangles. It was also designed from the ground up to be an aggressive trail bike instead of just a Mega with shorter travel. This means that Nukeproof was able to concentrate on giving it suspension and geometry characteristics that complement the intended primary use case. Go hard and have fun on a variety of trails. There is a 29 and a 27.5-inch version, and different spec levels with both carbon and alloy frames. We were sent the top-level RS-spec, which in addition to featuring a smattering of delicious SRAM parts, also gets a bump in fork travel, up to 160mm for the 27.5-inch model. The rear travel sits at 140mm for the 27.5-inch bike and 130mm for the 29er. The production bike features clear frame protection applied in critical areas, something that our test bike lacked. Checking out the geometry in more detail reveals a modern bike, but not one that pushes things to the extreme. Our size large provides a fairly generous 478mm of reach with a 65-degree head angle when setting the flip chip to the slackest setting. The C-tube is fairly short on the large. At 456mm, it will allow you to run a pretty long dropper if you want. The 170 shown here fits this 1m84 tester with no issues at all. The C-tube also offers plenty of insertion depth, which is good. On the slightly more negative side, we would have loved to see Nukeproof go 1 degree or so steeper with the effective C-tube angle, but since the actual C-tube angle is comparatively steep, it balances out fairly well, especially for slightly taller riders. At 430mm, the chainstays are short. Diving into the suspension curves, we discover a progressive bike with anti-squat numbers that are optimized for efficient pedaling in the easier gears with less kickback in the harder gears. Note that the anti-squat is on the low side of average, particularly for this version with a 10mm longer fork. The goal here was to design a bike that would be easy to get up the hill, but more importantly, Nukeproof wanted to squeeze the most out of the 140mm of rear travel on the way down. There is a moderate amount of anti-rise as well to help the bike settle down under braking. As previously mentioned, there's a flip chip that allows you to switch between trail and rail mode. Rail mode drops the BB by 6mm and slackens the head angle and C-tube angle by 0.5 degrees. Looking over the parts, the RS version tested here features the excellent RockShox Lyric Ultimate RCT3 and the Super Deluxe RCT Shock with a SRAM Eagle X01 transmission and code RSC brakes. A set of Mavix D-Max DH wheels fitted with a Maxxis Assegai DHR2 combo and a Reverb C1 round out the build, with Nukeproof's own brand components taking care of the cockpit and the touch points. The elaborate lines of the frame look a bit quirky from some angles, but overall, the bike looks like it means business, and the aggressive stance had us eager to come out and play from the minute we met it. Hitting the trail for the first time, our initial impression was of a poppy and dynamic trail bike. It moves out quickly under power, and although a certain amount of pedal bob is present when pedaling, the bike never feels sluggish. Quite the contrary. Yes, the anti-squat is moderate, but the shortish travel and a progressive leverage ratio curve help the bike sit up in its travel. The tires are seriously meaty, but they roll surprisingly well here. The effective C-tube angle is somewhat slack on paper, but the actual angle is pretty steep, and this translated to a bike that was comfortable on any climb, even for this tester's long legs. Pointing the bike down the hill, its playful nature was immediately at the forefront. It loves to pick up speed down the slightest incline, and it carries momentum through turns and over undulations really well. It rewards rider input with a direct response, but it never feels chattery or unsettled. The RockShox suspension components spec'd here really shine with regards to comfort and small bump compliance, and the rear shock tune is particularly impressive in the way it makes use of the 140mm of travel available. Nukeproof ships the bike with a token in the shock, which was the perfect setup for this 88kg tester, but you can easily remove it if you want a little bit more linear behavior. The progressive linkage design will help control bottom out in either scenario. As the speeds pick up, the bike continues to shine. Remember how we said the suspension is compliant and comfortable? Well, it remains that way even as things get hairier, never losing control, but also never becoming harsh. At this point, we also started to really appreciate the geometry of the bike. Note that we were on the 160mm fork version, and we also found ourselves using the lower rail setting of the flip chip for the majority of the testing. Set up this way, the Reactor is a real Jekyll and Hyde act, but it's Jekyll and Hyde at the same time somehow. Did you ever find yourself loving the forgiving and confidence-inspiring nature of your long-travel enduro bike, but you wished it had a bit more pop to it for those mellower trails? The Reactor RS is that bike. We've ridden quite a few mid to long travel trail and enduro bikes recently, and the Reactor stands out from the bunch with the amount of confidence it provides on rowdier trails. Simply put, we never felt like the geometry had us out of our depth, regardless of how steep and rough a trail we pointed it down. In that aspect, it will outpunch most trail bikes out there. There does come a point where the 140mm of travel out back won't be able to cash the checks that the front is writing, but when that happens, it's not a disaster either. You'll get tossed around a bit, but we never felt properly overwhelmed. This bike will happily head out on a full day XC mission only to hit the bike park the following day, and we'll say it again. That applies in particular to the longer fork versions. Just keep in mind that this bike will have you pushing the limits, because that's where it wants to be.
That was close.
Going over the bike after 5 intensive months of riding revealed that it had held up just fine, and this media bike had actually already been out with another publication before landing with us. The component scorecard is mostly excellent, with a few remarks. These all-new Mavic D-Max wheels feature pretty lackluster engagement, and in typical Mavic fashion, they are 2mm narrower than the now standard 30mm. We also struggled with the tubeless seal on one of them, and we did find that the rim was prone to pinching the tires, despite the EXO Plus casing spec'd by Nukeproof. On the plus side, the wheels feel good on the trail, and they have stayed true despite plenty of abuse. On the topic of the tires, we've been very impressed with the Assegai DHR2 combo. Predictable grip in most conditions, good rolling speed, nothing else to ask for. The Code RSC brakes have been equally impressive, delivering tons of dependable braking power day in and day out with no fuss. The Eagle XO1 shifting has proven itself up to the task many times over. Just make sure your hanger is straight and your beat tension is set properly, and it's smooth sailing from there on in. Nukeproof's cockpit and saddle have put in a great showing here as well. The finishing kit looks good and performs well. We were slightly taken aback at first sight of the 31.8mm cockpit. It looks a bit whimsy compared to the beefy 35mm setups we've gotten used to over the past couple of years, but it's been very comfortable on the trail, both in terms of compliance and angles. Coming back to the question we asked in the intro, what's a trail bike? It's pretty much whatever you want it to be, and that's one of the strong points of Nukeproof's new Reactor. You can get it as a 130mm 29er with a 140mm fork, switch the flip chip into the trail setting, and you'd have a super lively mile muncher that rolls over stuff with ease. Or you can get the 160mm forked 27.5-inch RS-spec Hooligan we've been reviewing here today, switch the flip chip into the rail setting, and you'd have the closest thing to an enduro you can get without sacrificing the playfulness and the dynamic performance on mellower trails. In this latter version, the geometry of the Reactor delivers a truly confidence-inspiring ride, and it wasted no time becoming our go-to for, well, just about any trail. Thanks for tuning in and checking out this review. We hope you enjoyed it. As usual, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. And until next time, happy trails!